and thank you for giving the full spectrum of what the GCF is and what it isn't. Chiz?
Thank you, Stefan. It's 3 minutes before 6 p.m. I think we're already past the time, so I'm going to make it very, very quick. Hearing from the 4 core facilitators on the reporting back, there were a lot of discussions on the need to engage with the private sector, need for the different instruments, how to engage with them, how do we ensure that the good communication is established between those who can make it happen and the funds that could actually facilitate the making of it happening. So I'm not presenting here anything that you don't know, but part of the reason why we really need to be engaged with the private sector, in addition to the trillion-dollar question that Peter raised earlier, is literally when you're talking about economic activity, the majority of that is taking place on this earth through the private sector. And that's fundamentally the reason why we need to be engaging with them. Having said all that, the private sector, there are different entities in the climate finance arena where we need to be looking into who these people are, what are some of the models that we could actually work with. For instance, there are capital providers, there are a lot of financial intermediaries and facilitators, as well as the actual industry players that are making things or providing services for the economy to go around. And they could actually have large corporations at the domestic level, multinational institutions, as well as SMEs, entrepreneurs, so on and so forth. So what exactly we can do in this arena, I think depending on who you're speaking about, the intervention models need to actually change. This is my last slide. Everybody wants to be engaged with the private sector. One of the things that we have been doing as the GEF through our independent evaluation office to really look into what are some of the elements that, how have we done in terms of private sector engagement, and what are some of the needed actions to make that happen. So these elements are taken from the private sector engagement evaluation that is ongoing and is going to be presented next week during the GEF Council, as well as the elements related to what we call the OPS6. These are the evaluations that helps inform the replenishment exercise we're going through right now. These are some of the elements we looked at in terms of how are we doing, how is the GEF doing in terms of engaging with the private sector. And the independent evaluation did find out we are a valued partner when you ask the private sector entities. And you can actually leverage more resources when you engage with the private sector. And it's not just about the money, as Zahir said. It's also linked to better performance vis-a-vis the corporate targets of achieving the development objectives. Projects that actually have private sector engagement tend to do really well in terms of meeting the objectives. 80% of them actually meet the objectives. What we found is here we're talking about lack of private sector engagement within you, but if you compare it to the biodiversity, land degradation, and other areas, you find that the climate change portfolio tends to have much more private sector engagement than other sectors. So from the global environmental perspective, it's considered to be doing fairly well in terms of engagement with the private sector. And as mentioned earlier, there are different players. There is a range of GEF non-grant instruments needed, be it equity, be it loan, as well as concessionality. And if you look at different projects that are put forward and have been completed by the GEF agencies and countries, they didn't actually do one thing. There were multiple channels through which they were trying to transform economies, the climate, and so on and so forth. And I think it was about 70% that utilized multiple so-called influence model to make that happen, be it capacity, having policy measures, de-risking, so on and so forth. Okay, so what is needed in terms of going forward? These are I just put 5 bullet items coming out of the evaluation. It was very clear from the evaluation that the private sector or the entities they're not aware of the opportunities as well as funding mechanisms that could get them engaged in climate action. They just don't know. And it's something that we really need to be doing a much better job of. The one that's already mentioned a lot, which is complex policies, processes. Private sector can't really wait, 18 months for the project to come to fruition. There has to be much more speed and so on and so forth. That has also been addressed, and there has to be other measures put into place to engage with the private sector, be it our participation in a separate fund, for instance, at the national level, and the decision-making, for instance, could be delegated at the national level to engage with the private sector, rather than these things coming back to the GEF to clear all the time. There was a lot of need and limitation in terms of the sharing of knowledge and best practice, and that still needs to be done. And also in terms of the GEF, there is actually quite a number of players engaged in the private sector and private capital field when it comes to climate change, particularly in the mitigation area. So what exactly would be the comparative advantage of separate funds, and how can we work together so that we're not missing glaring gaps while not duplicating efforts? That's another needed action. And last but not least, it was clear that there is a lot more need to do concerted evidence gathering so we can really know what's helping the countries to achieve climate action through private sector engagement. So I will stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiz. Time for 2 to 3 questions or short comments or reactions then between the panelists. Please, India.
Thanks, co-facilitator, and thanks for all the 3 presentations. I have a brief question.